Hi, BookTube. Welcome to Jackie's Literary Corner. I am Jackie, and today I am reviewing A Game of Thrones. This is my third time reading this book, because this apparently is the only one I can get through in the series. And I don't mean as in the rest of the series is bad. I mean, I obviously love the series, but more like commitment issues. So, in case by chance you don't know what this book is about and what the series is about, this is a story that takes place in the world of Westeros, which is kind of a medieval inspired setting. And Westeros is ruled by Robert, King Robert of the House Baratheon. And he has an advisor known as his Hand, who will take care of all his all the things he doesn't want to deal with, kind of rule the kingdom while he's off doing what he wants to do. And this advisor, the Hand, Jon Arryn, ends up dying suspiciously. And Robert decides to head north to ask his best friend, Lord of the North, Eddard Stark, to take Jon Arryn's place as his Hand. And Eddard is not too keen on this. He's not sure if he wants to do this. He doesn't want to leave his family, or his wife Catelyn. But Catelyn receives a message from her sister Lysa, who was Jon Arryn's wife, and was currently residing in the Vale, which is the kingdom in the eastern part of this part of Westeros. That she believes that Jon Arryn was murdered, and not just murdered, but murdered by the Lannisters. And the king's wife, the queen, is Cersei Lannister. So Catelyn and Ned agree that Ned needs to go be the Hand of the king and investigate this and find out what is really true, and if Lysa's right in that Jon Arryn was murdered by the Lannisters. He brings his daughter Sansa, who is betrothed to Prince Joffrey, Cersei and Robert's son, and he also brings Arya, his youngest daughter, so she can learn to be a lady of the court just like her sister. And as soon as he gets there, he gets mixed up in all the politics of this world, and he starts to piece together what Jon Arryn was piecing together before he was murdered. And starts to figure out maybe Lysa's right, and that the Lannisters are responsible for Jon Arryn's death. And he doesn't know who he can trust in this kingdom. The King's Council is all full of very untrustworthy characters. And we also have the plot of the last remaining heirs of the former rulers of the kingdom, the Targaryens. The king's heirs, Viserys and his sister Dany, are across the Narrow Sea trying to find their way back to King's Landing so they can take the throne back from Robert Baratheon. So Viserys arranges his 13-year-old sister to marry a Dothraki, a warlord, Khal Drogo, so that they will give him an army. The only problem is the Dothraki will not cross the ocean. And Viserys is a very impatient, bratty little boy. So once again, I loved this book. This was such a fun read. What I like about it is, like Tolkien, you feel that George R. R. Martin has created this whole world, and he even, creates the Dothraki language, which I'm sure is probably based on something. And he crafts such complex and interesting characters that you have such strong feelings for. You either love him or you hate him. He brings such vivid detail and descriptions to this world, really diving deep into the history and how this world looks. Now, all these details do add to the length of the story. So just to let you know, this is not counting the appendices, which is kind of a list of all the different houses of this world, which is, I think, is a really nice added bonus that he lists all the different houses and the family members of those houses, from the characters from before and to the present day characters, which I think is really nice since there's so many characters in the story and so many different houses, and I mean there's all these sub houses within the different parts of the world as well, like that, like especially when you were in the north where the Starks live, there's at one point they have to amass an army to fight against the Lannisters, and you have all these different sub houses that come together that support the Starks and Catelyn's family that Catelyn came from, the Tullys. So it's a lot. There's a lot of minor characters as well as secondary and like major characters throughout this whole novel. But not counting the list, the appendices, you have, I think, 674 pages in this edition of the book. Now, I don't know how many pages, and obviously the mass market probably, because I used to have a mass market copy of this book, it probably was a little bit longer than that. What I also think is really cool is that it's told, what's nice is that it's told, Martin tells it in all these different characters' perspective. You don't just get one character. You don't just get the Starks. You don't just get the Lannisters. You get all these different characters. And he continues that throughout the whole series, which is like, because one of the things that bothers me about YA now that I've gotten older and is that, and have 10 times more books under my belt, is that a lot of YA books are told in first person narrative, or you're mostly in the one character's point of view. Even if it's not first person, you stick with one particular character. There's always like one main character, one hero or heroine in the story. And I understand why young adult books probably do this. I mean, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think they do this because for teen readers who read teen fiction, whether they're teenagers or not, it's more fun. Like, you can connect and relate to the character and put yourself in that character's shoes when you are with that character the whole time. Plus, the negative aspect of having multiple perspectives is it can get confusing and hard to follow along sometimes, because you move around from different parts of the Westeros. And also, I imagine it is difficult to make sure your characters are individuals, like they don't all sound the same. I do hear that people run into that a lot. A lot of people for a lot of fan books, if there's multiple characters' perspectives, one of the complaints or criticisms is that all the characters can feel very similar to each other, and it's hard to see the difference between them. Although clearly, all these characters are very different from each other. You definitely can see the differences between like Sansa and Arya, or Cersei and Tyrion. Like, you definitely get their, you see, or Robert and, well, actually, we don't get Robert's perspective, but we do see the difference between Ned and Robert. Even if we don't get Robert's perspective. It would have been interesting to see Ned's perspective. Robert's perspective. Even though I don't love his character, I think it would be kind of interesting to see his point of view on the situation. What was nice about the TV show is that the TV show adaptation, we do get, in the first season, we do get parts in there, like there's a conversation on one of the episodes I watched last night, because I decided to go in and watch the first season because I was almost done with the book. Of course, I've watched the show and I read this book before, so it's not like anything is a surprise or anything. But there is a scene between Cersei and Robert that's kind of a nice, very enlightening scene. It's where they kind of discuss their relationship, and they're at this point in their relationship where they're like not as resentful of each other. They're okay with each other. And it's a nice conversation, and we don't get that in the book because we don't have either of their perspectives in this first book. So it was kind of nice to see that. And there's also a scene between Joffrey and Cersei as well that's kind of nice to see because it enlightens the audience on these characters that we don't know for sure about them unless you've read the book and seen the show when you first read this book. Which is not a bad thing. I think can be both good and bad. It depends because it does add a little mystery and is like to the characters and it's like, do we trust this character? Maybe they're gonna be a good guy after all, and maybe they're not a good guy. So yeah, basically I like the multi-perspective better in fantasy because, although I still will, it doesn't matter if it has, whether it has it or not, I'm still obviously going to read it, but it's kind of nice when it has it in there because then you can see everybody's point of view, you can understand every character's feelings, every important character. Another thing that what I like about this world is that George R. R. Martin also gave, you have history, which includes what they believe. You have certain people believe in the old gods. And there's the people now, the children of the forest, and people like some people still believe in them. Some people believe in the children of the forest. Others are like, well, they've been gone thousands of years. They don't exist anymore. So it's kind of interesting to explore that. And I feel like we have something similar. We have Christianity and Muslim and Jewish and trying to think of. And Catholicism and all that. We have all of our own different religions, so it's kind of the same thing, except for a little more mystical feel to it than our religions. Which brings me to the magic. There's not a lot of magic in this book, but there's two big magic elements in this book. Well, really only one, because one of them doesn't get introduced until towards the end of the book, like officially introduced. And we spend more time with that magic element in book 2, I remember. But, the one major magic element is that they have the ice zombies, or the White Walkers, which are this big looming threat. And the people on the wall, Castle Black, where Jon Snow, the bastard of Eddard Stark, has been sent to, they kind of protect the realm from these, from any evil forces, and they are the ones who have to deal with the White Walkers. But what's interesting, what I like the juxtaposition of this whole threat of the zombies. Meanwhile, you have all these people, all these different houses, fighting for the Iron Throne this whole time. So comparing. You have this big threat that would affect everybody if they made it past the wall, the White Walkers, and meanwhile all these people are fighting over the pettiness of power. So it's a very interesting parallel between you have these two different fights going on, these two different wars going on. The war for power over the Iron Throne, and then this war that the Night's Watch is fighting against these White Walkers. Oh, and then there's also another king, trying to, from beyond the wall, Mance Rayder, who's also a threat, and that's also a threat that the Night's Watch has to deal with. Now, we do have a lot of strong female characters that are in leadership roles and have their own personalities. They aren't just damsels in distress. They're not just the wives or the characters meant to be objectified. But we do have a lot of that. So that can be kind of a negative, I think, especially for female readers, when you see there's a lot of female characters that are, like I said, objectified. And talked about in very vulgar terms and talked about as just sex objects. But considering this world is inspired, fortunately, that's how. Of course, it is a fantasy, so you could argue that George R. R. Martin didn't have to do that in this world. But it is based on actual history, I think. Like, one of the biggest inspiration, I believe, is the War of the Roses, which I think is really cool. I like when we take actual history and say, well, what if there was actual magic in this world? Or, like in this case, where it's inspired by real history, but it's not our world. It's its own world that kind of has a similar conflict going on in it, that's similar to an actual historical event. And I just think that's a really cool concept. And also just speculate, okay, what is this supposed to be? You know, what inspired this character or this thing or this event? Like, is it actually based on, like, did he actually take actual history and base it on this? And just looking through it and trying to, scan it and determine what was inspired by what. In fact, the other day, my dad and I was talking about this book with my dad, and he was looking up. I was asking him about War of the Roses, so he looked it up, and we talked about it a little bit, and I was thinking about what is inspired by. What elements did George R. R. Martin take from that? So with that all being said, like I said, the female character, it can be very uncomfortable reading about what these female characters go through in the story, and I think it's a lot worse I remember it being a lot worse in the show. So female readers, if by chance you've never read this, you might not like that part, or if you've never read the show, never seen the show, you might not like that aspect of it if you're even remotely interested in this. Although I think most people have watched this or watched the show or at least read the books, if anything. And like I said, and Dany's relationship with Khal Drogo can be very uncomfortable. Like, I know that eventually they grow to love each other, and that people like Khal Drogo. But it does, looking back on it and rewatching the show and reading the book, there's some aspects of it that make me a little uncomfortable. That made me kind of iffy about it. So, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing with these kind of stories. If you're going to have elements like that, you gotta just be aware of them. The reader needs to be aware of them, I think, and to decide what are they comfortable with. Because, they obviously can't change what the author already wrote. So, you just gotta decide, are you comfortable with that? Are you okay with that? Do you accept that is in the story, even if you don't approve of it, But like I said, we do still have a lot of strong female characters in the story. And it's hard to decide which are my favorites. It's always been hard because there's so many characters I like. Like, I like Dany and Arya, and I did grow to like Sansa. In the beginning, like most people, I did not like Sansa, but I kind of feel for her and like her now as a character since having, seen her character grow. But it sucks what she went through, though, in the story, and that, you just get very frustrated with her character, but you kind of understand. I understood where she was coming from and why she thinks the way she does. And she does grow and learn, and she grows up a lot. It's sad that these characters, especially these characters that started as kids in the beginning of the story, they grow up in this cruel world, and they grow up almost too fast. They just started out as babies, and then all of a sudden they experience such horrors, and there's a lot of weight and responsibility put on their shoulders at such a young age. Like, for me, 15 is not old enough to, run me in charge. Like, I know, in high school or middle school, you can have, like, class presidents at that age and stuff like that, but that's in school. It's not, not a lot of responsibility. You don't have the free world on your shoulders. But these characters, like Robb Stark, is only 15, and all of a sudden, because his dad is not there to do it, he is leading the North. And considered the king of the North. and he's so young compared to, a 15 year, but he has a lot of responsibility, and he's probably in a way more mature than today's 15-year-olds, but also immature at the same time. Like, he gets, when Catelyn's trying to guide him and help him, there's this whole issue of him being like, I'm a grown man, you can't tell me what to do. Like, why are you telling me what to do? Why are you treating me like a child? That frustration that a lot of teenagers get when it's like, they're not children, but they're not adults yet. They're kind of in the middle. So he's kind of caught between still feeling like a boy, but trying to be a grown man at the same time. And, his reaction to his mother being there to try to help him isn't always positive. They do butt heads, and they butt heads a lot more in the second book, I think. And let's see. I also really like two of the characters that are most fun. I think, in a sense that you can't trust them, they're unpredictable, and they know things that other characters don't know, are Varys and Littlefinger, Lord Peter Baelish with the fingers. And oh my god, these two they're so sinister, and like, I definitely trust Varys a lot more than Littlefinger. Littlefinger is so slimy, and he was in love with Kat, when she was a girl, but she rejected him for, because she was betrothed to Brandon Stark, and then she didn't marry Ned because Brandon Stark dies, and she just saw Peter as a friend, like a little brother, that kind of sucks when you're like seen as just as a little brother, you're seen as a brother and sister. And he does not take it, and you get the impression he never took it well. And he ends up fancying Sansa, who is a little girl. She starts the book as an 11-year-old because she reminds him of her mother. And it's just so gross. But he's such a well-written character he's such a well-written character. I mean, all these characters are so well-written. Like, George R. R. Martin, like Stephen King, is really good at characters. Like, I feel like Game of Thrones is like Stephen King meets Tolkien. Which, I hope no one gets mad at me making that comparison. But it feels very like a mixture of both of those two. In a lot of ways. And like I said, and then I like Varys. He's one of my favorites as well. And I trust him a little bit more than Littlefinger. A lot more than Littlefinger. And I think he has better intentions. Although he's not, who knows if he's an ally to, because he keeps saying he's for the realm. So who does he think deserves to be, run the kingdom? That's the big question. This is, of course, like I said, not only does George R. R. Martin, he doesn't shy away from vulgarity. He doesn't, women are often treated badly, and to be fair, and then, but he also, the story, I mean, of course, like the story if you're reading this for the first time, it feels very unpredictable. Like, you don't know what's gonna, like, this is not my first time reading this, so, I know what's gonna happen, but if you're reading this for the first time, it does feel very unpredictable because, you don't know what's gonna happen to these characters, who's gonna live, who's gonna die. Because this world is very brutal and cold and cruel and war-torn and bloody. Very gruesome world. And, it feels realistic, like how you would imagine the medieval world would be. Which I think really adds a layer to the story, and it makes it even more a compelling read. Because, like I said, I think a lot of times books are much more interesting when you can't predict what's going to happen. Like, that's my big issue with reading romance. I'm like, I love watching romance, but reading it, it can be kind of boring sometimes because you kind of, which, although granted, oftentimes predictability can also be comfort. But it can also be kind of boring because it's like, things are going to work out for these characters. Yeah, they're going to have some drama and conflict, and something might potentially tear the lovers apart, but they'll always end up together by the end of the story. Unless it's like a drama, like a historical romance or something. Well, like, in, like, I'm not talking, obviously I'm not talking something like Bridgerton, which that technically is historical, or fake history. Well, at least the show is an alternate history kind of thing. But the books are historical, but they're also not, they have drama in them, but I wouldn't consider them like drama, like, like it's not like, Moulin Rouge or something where, where it's a little depressing. But, what's nice about this is, of course, now it's, I know what's going to happen, but it's still very exciting and thrilling. Now, there are moments where it's a little slower because there's conversations the characters are having with each other. Ned is trying to figure out what Jon Arryn figured out. There's characters, but the conversation these characters have are so interesting. You just gotta, like, looking back, thinking about like, just the scene between Sansa and the Queen towards the last part of the book, the end, like right before the beginning of the end, I guess, where they're trying to get Sansa to do something, and everything has kind of gone to shit at that point. Everything is falling apart, and they're just totally playing Sansa. They're messing with her, and they're trying to persuade her to do something, and they're just manipulating her the whole time. And things that they say, the lines and all the dialogue is so well written, and just like, if you don't know these characters, if you were just a naive young girl who didn't know these people and believe that you could trust them, you can see where someone could fall for the words that they say. But as a reader, since you can't trust these characters, and you know what's really going on at this point, whether you've read the book or not already, you can see also, you can read between the lines, between the dialogue, and you can see what they're doing how they're manipulating Sansa. But there's so many scenes, like the conversations are very riveting, with these characters. Like, there's, so it makes it less boring, I think. Even though it can feel a little slow, it's less boring because the conversations are, so intriguing. You're wondering what they're not actually, what they're saying, what they're really saying. Like, I always remember the line from the Zorro, the movie from the late 90s, where Don De La Vega is trying to train Alejandro, and he says, a nobleman says one thing and thinks another. And I think about that all the time when I'm seeing stories where you have, the poor people versus the rich people. You have the nobles or the politicians, and how, like, any story, especially historical stories that have that kind of class divide, and thinking about those characters that are in in power, and thinking about what are they really saying. Like, they say this one thing, but do they really mean that? Or what are they really saying to you through their niceties? So, yep, this was, once again, just like last time, I enjoyed this book. I had a good time with it. I want to make sure I get to the next book right away. But if you are one of the few people who has probably not read this, but you like this genre, the fantasy genre and medieval fantasy, then check this book out. Check this series out if you haven't already. And if you've only watched the show, read the book. The books are fun, I mean, I know that, like I said, it did start to go down the hill later on, but I still think it's something. I mean, it made a mark, this series, on the, amongst, in the entertainment industry. Now, yes, it did not, the mark, fell apart eventually, but for a while it was considered everybody's favorite, and people were constantly talking about it. And now they're doing a spin-off, and people are eagerly waiting, hoping that George R. R. Martin will write the last 2 books before he dies. Either that or someone else is going to have to take over, which I'm curious who will take over. And it was funny because I remember watching a Daniel Green video where he's talking about this, and apparently people are saying that Brandon Sanderson should take over if something happens to Martin, and it's like, well, yeah, Brandon Sanderson is great, but would he be a fit for this world? Like, I think sometimes people are saying, because a lot of people love Brandon Sanderson and his world, he does create amazing worlds and cool magic systems and everything. But just because he took over Wheel of Time for Robert Jordan does not mean he necessarily will be good for taking over for Martin if something happens to Martin before he finishes the series. But who knows? I think it's, like I said, I believe the reason why it's easier for me and I'm not as been upset about as a lot of people and impatiently waiting is because, I'm so behind the series. Like, I've read the first 2 books twice, and it's not that, and because I have never been able to get through the whole series because I'll get distracted. So it just doesn't faze me as much, because who knows, maybe by the time I get through get to Dance of Dragons, which I think is the last book that was published, then the next 2 books will already be out. So, anyway, so that's my review of A Game of Thrones. The first book, and I will be starting Clash of Kings soon. And I hope you guys enjoy this video. If you like it, please subscribe and give my video a thumbs up. And I hope you are enjoying your reading and having a good spring if you're on the northern hemisphere. And I guess if you're in the southern hemisphere, I hope you're having a good autumn. And I will talk to y'all later. All right, bye!